Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk Food Safety with Tia and Jill.
Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from.
Right, that's right.
Yes.
So we're curious. Where are you joining us from? We'd love for you to share in the comments where you're listening from. And if you are listening on replay, please use the hashtag replay um, hashtag because we do go back and we look at comments, and all of our replays are up on our YouTube channel. So subscribe to our Catalyst YouTube channel, and you'll get our notifications when we put them up. But we like to see who's also listening on replay versus live. So please add where you're joining from. Nathan, hello, good morning.
Yeah.
Um, I'm glad you can join us for a little bit and catch the rest on replay. Awesome.
Yes, because we love the perspective that you bring. You always have good comments and posts and questions. So we love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. And so, if it is your first time joining us, we are Jill and Tia, and we really focus on how do we help develop and grow technical leaders and teams and help organizations and leaders like you build sustainable food safety culture. And food safety culture is really the buzzword right now. And we really look at it from a different approach. We have coaching based programs that really provide a different perspective and draw from the resourcefulness that you and your team already have
Mhm.
to help you get to where you want to go.
Yes, yes. And you're right. We look at it a little bit differently, and we're coming at it with a different approach. And today's topic is really all about being human centric. And
Mhm.
when Jill talks about our coaching based programs, and everything we do is really based on coaching. We're really looking at that human aspect of food safety culture, which, in our opinion, that is the key to strengthening and maintaining and building a sustainable food safety culture.
It certainly is. And, so even as when you first think of food safety culture, like what is the first word that you think of? We would love to know. So drop it in the comments and let's see what's like. Do we see patterns? Do we think of the same things? Because I think we all have different versions of what we think it is, even if we have this kind of overarching big picture of what we believe it to be.
Yes, yes, I
Mhm.
agree. And when we talk to people in food safety, I get the sense that we understand food safety culture, right? It's probably what we've been screaming at the top of our lungs for years, right? At our organizations and to our counterparts. Um, but now that it's becoming like this buzzword, people are starting to listen a little bit more. And
Mhm.
we're starting to put together these words that sort of represent it.
Mhm.
So yeah, we would love to hear from you all on what do you think about
Yes, and Austin, I knew you would have something. So you've already dropped in people and behavior. Yes.
it. Absolutely.
Yes. Danny, welcome. It's nice to see you here today. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, Austin, that fits right into the conversation today around being human centric. People in their behaviors, right? How they respond, how they are motivated and inspired by anything, right? In this particular case, it's food safety.
Mhm.
But really, how do people behave? How do they take in information? How do they commit to your vision and to your message, right? So that
Mhm.
they can carry it forward.
Yeah. And, if you've joined us before, I've shared my story about when I finished grad school and I came out to industry. I really had this belief because it's what we're taught is that like data will set us free, right? Like
Mm,
science is the answer. And even though I'm a personable person, right? I still typically would lead with data and science and logic. And while that's really important and a critical part of our food safety programs, I wasn't always putting people first and bringing people along with me and inviting people to the table the way that I needed
mm.
to help drive food safety culture, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's big.
Mhm. And I think, and I'm going to stereotype our food safety professionals, but I would imagine that there's probably some of you that may identify that with, or maybe many, because that's often our focus. That's part of the love that we like going into science.
Yeah.
And right, I don't know about you, but I still like to nerd out in the lab periodically and do some plating and, weigh out a whole bunch. That stuff is fun.
Yeah.
Um, but it also doesn't always relate to all the other people around us. And
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
how do we bring people with us?
Right.
It's
Exactly.
mhm,
Exactly. Danny, I like that. Attitudes and goals is what you think
mhm,
about around food safety culture.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think attitudes could even be related to behaviors a little bit around, how do people feel about the direction the organization is going in, and can they get behind it, right? And
Mhm,
how does that translate to what they do every day on the floor, or how they talk to
yeah.
other people, right?
Mhm,
And how they talk about programs,
mhm.
you know.
Well, and I know we're gonna talk about this a little bit more, but, many people who are food safety professionals often are what we are gonna call kinda like the working manager, working
Hmm.
leader,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We have additional responsibilities in addition to leading teams to do kind of our technical things.
Yeah.
And, so I think one of the ways that we see that we're not always as human centric as we could be, or maybe want to be, or should be, fill in the word that you want, or plan to be, is, even when you get ready for your day, and I'm guilty of this, I'd be like, I have these 10 things that need to get done today. Guess what? I
Hmm.
start typically, or in my old self would have started typically with, I need to finish this report. I need to analyze this data. I need to get this program done.
Hmm.
Instead of, I need to check in with my team members and see what's all happening for them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And some of it is because like we don't think that way, right? Um, but some of it is that we don't give ourselves the space to be able to do that, because we have an episode where we talk about the middle manager squeeze.
Hmm.
Middle managers, we're trying to be these strategic leaders while also being these executors. And so if you haven't been like developed into a leader, right? Like if you haven't switched your mind from I'm this expert that's doing the work to I'm this
Hmm.
leader that's now doing work through people. If you
Yeah.
haven't switched your mindset on that, you'll find yourself that you're trying to execute and you're trying to be strategic. And there's not enough hours in the day to do that.
Yeah. And and I think that's really kind of even personifies this whole, like, where people, I don't want to say people get lost, but we kind of lose this focus on food safety culture is about people.
Hmm.
Because even when we're trained to know, like, oh, food safety culture, I need to start with people. I think the other part sometimes is we default right away to, well, you know what? We need to take a quiz. We need to find out where we are.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. You know, and it's because of what you hit on before, is that we rely on the data,
Hmm.
right? And so we have to think to ourselves, well, why is that? Why do we jump into, why is rational persuasion, right, which is a method of influence, why do we go right to being logical, to showing the data and saying like, look, this is what the data is saying, this is why we should do it. And we know that pushback is, I mean, we've all done it in our careers, right? And we continue to get the pushback of, but do we really need it? And we're like, this is what the data is saying. Of course we need it. And it's like, maybe we shouldn't do it this year, right?
Yes.
And it stuns us, especially as we become even stronger in being experts. It stuns us that people are not looking at the data and responding accordingly.
Hmm.
And it's because like we've been focusing on becoming technical expert for years. We
Hmm.
go through school, we have our degrees. Typically, when you're onboarding to a new company, what do they say? Learn the process. How does product flow? How many pumps do you have and how do they work? How does your x-ray work? Those are the things that people are talking to you about all the time. Understand
Hmm.
the way that we validate, understand our calibration processes, and how to control that and how to optimize it. And that's what people focus on, even on onboarding, right? There's really
Right.
no leadership piece of it.
No, that's really insightful because typically it's know your CCPs and know what will go wrong and know your
Mhm.
recall plan. And don't get us wrong, those are really critical parts because we've been there. We understand
Mhm.
that carrying that load is heavy. And the
Right.
last thing I want to do is be a new food safety quality manager, director, whatever role and not know who needs to be part of a recall,
Right.
what triggers a recall, what is going to stop product from leaving our facility from a
Mhm.
CCP standpoint or a pre-ship review. Those are things that we do need to know. But
Absolutely.
how can we enrich the conversation when we talk about like how are you getting to know your team?
Right. Right. And
Mhm,
how are you combining those things, right?
mhm,
Like most of the time, like I said, we're asked about those things. We're rewarded for those things, right? Like that's why
mhm,
you were promoted into this leadership role is because you're a strong technical expert and
mhm,
you've been able to complete these projects where you've used your technical background to be able to solve major problems, in your organization. And so you're promoted, but then you realize that, I haven't had any leadership development at all.
mhm,
And the way that I know how to do work is to do it myself and to get
mhm,
it done. And to, all the things we tell ourselves, right? Like we're the expert, we got promoted, I have to do it. If I don't do it, then it's not going to get done.
mhm.
But we, like you said, we miss the piece of people where it's
Yes.
like you can make sure the work gets done by empowering your people. You can
Mhm.
learn about your systems through people. And people sometimes forget about that, right? Where they're like,
Yeah.
I have to do it myself. I'm not going to bring anyone else in the boat with me or talk to other people to figure it out. I'm going to do it myself.
Yeah, we actually make it harder for ourselves because we feel we have to do it by ourselves. We have to do it alone. We're the only ones. And
Yeah.
I love it because often then when we talk with other people, they're like, "We could have helped you with that. We could have told you that."
Right. Right. Exactly.
Mhm.
So, food safety culture, and Austin said it, right? And even Danny is getting onto it with, even attitudes or how we even support our goals, is that food safety culture is about people.
Mhm.
And it's about how people behave, how people interact with one another, how people commit to your message. That's what the culture piece is in
Mhm.
food safety culture.
Yeah, and I think it's really amazing when we think and go, how can we leverage, understand, get the perspective of people around us before we collect
Yeah.
data? Like
Mm.
what will we
Mhm.
learn? Or I think about how many times we've created solutions before talking to people, right?
Mhm.
Because we're analyzing the problem, and in our head, we've already created a story about how to solve it. And do we fully engage people to solve it with us? Or how
Mm.
about solve it at all? And we may give different parts, but I think often as technical leaders, because we're looked to for answers, we'll jump in and do that part and not always fully engage the people around us to
Right.
also be part of that. And when we
Right.
co create things together, that's also about creating culture and
Mm.
the community that we want to see.
Right. But and I love how you kind of talk about co-creating things together because a culture is something that everyone creates together. And we like to say that everyone has a food safety culture. Everyone. And it's either poor or it's great, right? And it's sustainable and it's world class. Like we like to say. But one exists because you have a group of people together interacting with one another in the same space. If you have solutions that are co-created, everyone owns a piece of that,
Mhm.
everyone has buy-in into it, and you will see that your culture is working well together
Yes.
versus no, these are the people that create solutions, you're just the person that's going to execute, and we don't want to hear your feedback, we don't want you involved, we over here we're going to do that, and then you over there, you stay over there in your sandbox in your lane, right?
Yeah.
You find that that's what you see a lot in cultures that are not that great, right?
hmm Yeah. And, Austin, I appreciate that you put that, about having cross departmental teams and bringing unique experiences. And I definitely agree with like, how do we be inclusive to have different perspectives? Because it's diversity of thought, it's diversity of experience. All of these things contribute to the culture and where we want to go. I would say, though, I would like to, how do we involve more than just a food safety culture team? Because I think that goes back to even Duran talked about quality councils back in the day.
Yeah.
And that can be definitely one approach. I think we've also had HACCP teams and food safety teams. And sometimes when things are removed and taken outside of perhaps, let's say, a leadership team or a plant team,
Yeah.
can we drive the same type of ownership and engagement versus having one team being kind of like a steering committee?
Yeah.
Um, and those are things that I think are really important for us to consider and for others to consider as they are on their food safety culture journey about being inclusive and making sure it's an open community for everybody to really step up and have buy-in.
Yeah. We get that, we get some of those questions sometimes on like, is this going to add extra to my staff? Is this going to
Mhm.
add an extra group or extra documentation
Or
or
meetings.
extra meetings? Exactly. But in reality, we're already meeting together. We're
Mhm.
already doing these things. And if you're not, you should be, right? Like that's a different conversation. But in, one of the things that I think about in cultures that I've been a part of that's really strong, what you would consider a food safety culture team, a lot of that was our HACCP team.
Mm.
And it was cross functional. And we were talking about HACCP a lot of the times, but we also talked about, installations that are coming and food safety. What do you think about this installations? And oh, we need to have our sanitary design evaluation happen. And this is when we're planning on doing this from an engineering standpoint or from a maintenance standpoint. What PMs are coming up and
Mhm.
what do we need to look out for and what are we missing? Those type of things can happen within your regular structure, right?
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
need to make food safety a part of that conversation. And really that's what you want to see. And what we really focus on is how do you integrate those things into the way that you're already doing work.
Yeah. And Tia, I know you hear me talk about this all the time, but how do we can how can we consider how we change the conversation? Because
Mm,
culture is created through conversations. And
mm,
so if we want to see something different, we have to create it through how we show up, which is part of our
yeah,
attitude, on what we say, which is right, really how we say things. So for example, how often are you walking down the hall and you see people and you're like, "Hey, how are you? How are you? How are you?" We usually get the same response, good, fine, whatever.
right.
If we want to change how we're interacting with people, what's a different question to ask? Like,
Mm,
what's been fun today? What are you planning for today? But we have to change the conversation because otherwise we're going to go on default and we do the easy path because it's comfortable. And right, that's just, you know, human from a human standpoint, it's about conserving energy for when the bear comes to get us. We want to have
mhm,
enough so we can think about running. Um,
great.
but it also means that we have to put intentional effort into changing the conversation if we want a different outcome.
Right. Absolutely.
So if we're looking to at our HACCP team meeting to have a different conversation so that we drive a different culture or where we want to go, what different questions can we ask? How can we have conversations in a new way?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that because you have these touch points, these cross-functional touch points that you
Mhm.
can ask these different questions. Like
Mhm.
for instance, operations almost always have a daily direction setting meeting of some sort, right? A shiftly meeting, something is happening. How do you integrate food safety there and ask different questions to say, okay, you're about to get your shift ready. What barrier
Mm.
do you need to be removed in order for you to have a safe day?
Mhm.
What, oh, we had an hold last night because of non-conforming product. What are some ways we can prevent this from happening in the future?
Yeah.
Having those conversations and having that team think through it because they don't want to hold. right? Like they weren't able to ship those cases out. Now they're talking about, all these different things because they had an issue. And instead of just looking at me and saying, hey, we have this product on hold, can we release it? I'm going back to them to say, okay, how do we prevent this from happening? What do you
Mhm.
need from the food safety and quality team to help you remove whatever happened from the situation so that we're not having this problem in the future?
Mhm. It
Having those conversations happen in those Shipley meetings.
and that's always a great place to even start because how many times, and I've done this, I've led it and I've been part of it, where we come together and there's either something on a whiteboard or on a screen and it's like a list of KPIs or some numbers that
Mhm.
are supposed to tell us something. And
Right.
the
Yeah.
whole meeting is around, let's look at these numbers and tell me what went wrong.
Right.
That is
Yeah.
a wonderful place where we invite people to join the conversation differently.
Yeah.
It's where instead of saying, let's just focus on once again this number, like how do we shift it to be about people and how they are interacting with that process?
Right.
Or what once again, just engage them differently because
Yeah.
if we want to change the culture, we have to change the conversation.
Right. Exactly.
Mhm.
Yes. And yes to Austin, those open-ended questions, so important because then you get someone else's perspective. One
Mhm.
thing that I used to love to do when I worked at a facility that had three different shifts, I would go down and I would ask the same open question to members of the team on all three shifts. See if I get a different answer, see if they point out something different to me. Maybe the issue that they're seeing on first shift is different than the issue that they're seeing on second
Mhm.
shift, even though in the numbers it looks the same, right?
Mhm.
And it seems like from the data that we're looking at that they're very similar and there might be a training issue or whatever. But when you actually talk with people, there you hear, no, I know how to do that, but this is what's happening to prevent me from doing it
Mm.
the way that I should be doing it.
Mm.
And then you learn something different, right? So having those open-ended questions are so important, right?
Oh, they are. They are. And Tia, that reminds me of, we often talk about, right, people are our greatest assets.
Hmm.
And yet, when something happens, we usually go to numbers first. Well, let's go see what this process is doing. Let's go see what went wrong, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I love that Kim Rice, if anybody knows Kim Rice, her brother Walt just wrote this great article. And he put, here are the three things that leaders should assume. People know more than what we think they do. So, right,
Hmm.
how many times have we been like, I don't know if they know what's happening over there on the floor? Well, of course they do. They're living it. So people know more than what we think they do. The second one is people work harder than we think they do,
Hmm.
right? Too often we're like, "Oh, what were they doing? Couldn't they catch this?" You know what? Oftentimes we have people, I mean, look at your own schedule.
Right.
Busy is like, the new black, or, it's what everybody
Right.
talks about. Busy, 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 busy.
Right.
Um they have a lot to do. And the third one is people have other things going on. And so while we think, gosh, why didn't you catch that going down the line? They could be over here because something else was happening.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that really has stuck with me since this came out
Yeah.
because once again, it's being very people centric.
Right.
It's
Right.
very much focusing on how do we hey, people are the greatest assets, but yet we still default to numbers.
Right, exactly, exactly. I love those three things that leaders, right, should assume because and they're right.
Mhm.
If you actually go down and you talk with people on the floor or even talk with your manager, right?
Mhm.
So there's even if you can even look up and say, how many times my manager doesn't really do anything. Or top leadership doesn't really do anything wrong. And it's like, well, they must be doing something, right? But it's like they probably know more than you think they do. So they
Mhm.
probably know even things that you don't even know with
Mhm.
the organization, which is a lot of the cases. They're working harder than you think, right? So like typically when we even get in those leadership positions, we're like, wow, I had no idea this was under your umbrella, right?
Mhm.
And then they have other things going on, right? Like there's other things that's going on from a personal standpoint, also a
Yes.
business standpoint, that we have to you know, juggle, right?
Yeah.
And so like if you get to those points and have those conversations, right? Then you start getting closer to root cause so that you can strengthen
Mhm.
your food safety culture. You
Yeah,
know,
and
okay.
I think those are gold mine questions. So when we talk about culture and where we go with culture, if we keep those in the front of our mind and always and stay curious about like what else do people know? What else have they
Right.
been doing? What else is going on?
Right.
Once again, that helps create a new conversation that you're going to hear me say this 20 times today that leads to a different culture.
Right. Exactly. So Jill, we've been talking about people and we're like, get out there and talk with people and ask, open-ended questions and find out what they know. Some people will hear this and they say, I do that. I
Mhm.
go out on the floor, I ask them questions, and I know now what they're dealing with. Like I feel like I know what they're dealing with. I feel like I know what those barriers are. I feel like, I feel like my leader, I understand what they're doing, and like I just need their support. How do
Mm.
I help influence them to take the next step?
Hmm.
Or even if it, and of course, we talked about influence before on here, it's a huge piece of how to move your food safety culture forward, right?
Yeah.
But what would you say around like, I'm having these questions, but nothing seems to be moving forward?
See, yeah, for my first thought is I love our unscripted days like today
I
because
know.
thank you for pinging that question over. But my first thought is awesome. Like if you've taken the time to have different conversations so that you have a better understanding of people around you and your processes,
Mhm.
seriously, congratulations. Because
Right.
many people won't make the space and time to do that. And keep doing that. Keep being curious. And I think even when we have an awareness of maybe what's not going, you know, when we have awareness of what things are going well and which things aren't, I would say the next thing that we really need to consider is people readiness.
Mm,
Because even though we're like, good, let's make that change, or somebody's like,
yeah.
yeah, I'm ready to start tomorrow. Are we really? Are we really ready to start that tomorrow?
Hmm.
And I think that when we can really bring in this element of are people ready to move or what do they need to shift, we
Yeah.
need to have those conversations next because what we think of right away, like, right, hey, I'm ready for change. My version, the story I'm telling myself about it is going to be very
Right.
different than the one you're telling yourself.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of alignment and understanding that still go into people readiness.
And you are so right. And what we've seen around people readiness is that sometimes, most of the time, it's the leader, the manager that's trying to influence.
Mhm.
They're not actually ready to lead their people through because they don't have the time, quote
Mhm.
unquote, don't have the time. So they haven't done any workload
Yeah,
capacity.
that middle manager squeeze thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's
They
real.
haven't
It's real.
real. It's real. Like they're squeezed and they are overworked and they're burnt out and
Mhm.
they're not even inspired to make the next step, right? They're not inspired to continue to push for these things. And so when you talk about readiness and people who follow us, that we're talking a lot about our boot camp that's coming up, our technical
Mhm.
leader boot camp. And it that brings to mind to me because there's so many people that join our program because their organization is joining our program and they're like, I don't know what I'm going to get out of it, but I'm ready to learn. And then they realize, oh, I wasn't ready to lead this group of people
Mhm.
because I'm burnt out and overworked. So I need to look at my workload and how do
Mhm.
I build my day and have those conversations with my manager around priorities. And I need to learn a little bit more about how to influence because I know what's going on. I try to tell them, hey, here's the data. You go forth and do, when really I need to be inspiring them and I need to be involving them in the solution, or I need to bring more groups together, whatever it happens to be. That manager, that leader hasn't done their homework, right? And they're not
Yeah.
ready to lead people through.
Or I think sometimes they're overlooked. by our
Mm,
organizations in terms of getting the right support.
yeah.
At least in many organizations I'm in, and I'd love to hear what other people are thinking. There's a lot of we need our top leadership to support it. They have to have buy-in. La, 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 la. Yep. And then it goes directly to our frontline team members. They all need to know what needs to happen and we need to champion for them. But
Yes.
this middle group doesn't always get the love and support that they need.
Right.
And they really do have a tricky spot to be because they're trying to help carry this mission that they've been handed,
Hmm.
typically handed, because not as many organizations have interactive catch-ball type approaches when they develop strategy and where they're
Hmm.
going. So they're handed, this is your marching orders or where you need to go,
Right.
and it's on top of what they already have. And that one simple thing is really 1,012 actions or things that need to happen with the same group who's
Yes.
already has a full plate of work.
Yeah.
And so I think often they're overlooked to say, well, what needs to come off your plate for you to be able to help move this forward?
Right.
What additional support skills, resources do we need to have available for you to be able to be effective to move this forward?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so important because they really are the drivers of food safety culture, right? Like when we think about this human centric food safety
Mhm.
culture, the person or the people, the group that's driving that are those middle managers.
Mhm.
And but those middle managers don't have the support, like you said, the support that they really need in order to do it.
Mhm.
I mean, you look at culture change throughout any industry, right? And you hear the CEO talking about it, right? Or senior top leaders kind of talking about how the culture got changed and things, all the other things, right? That CEOs and others talk about. But once you start actually looking into how they change the culture of the organization, you realize that it's really those middle managers that are the drivers, where the CEO has said, "Oh, you guys are doing great stuff over here. How are you doing it? And how do we accelerate it through the organization? How do we spread it right through the organization?" But it's really these middle managers that have figured out, that have gotten the leadership development that they need to say, okay, I'm going to influence and grow my area, and then the organization can take that and spread that across the organization,
Mhm.
you know based off of how I've made my sort of like microculture sustainable and great. And that's something that I've done in my career, where it's like, okay, I don't have the influence circle, right, to
Mhm.
influence every part of the organization. But what I can do is influence my circle. And once things started moving in the right direction and people are like, wow, what's happening over there? Like, the data is starting to show that something is different. And but before, we've been talking about this data for years, right? And
Mhm.
nothing has changed. What has changed now? And so
Yeah.
having those conversations around, okay, how do we do a culture change here? People are like, I want some of that.
Mhm.
Like, I want some of that. I want to talk about that. I want to connect with my team differently. Show me how, coach me through, right? Like
Mhm.
that's why we focus on coaching, is because, both of our backgrounds, we coach others
Mhm.
to get to food safety cultures that we've seen even in our corporate America lives, right?
Mhm.
And that's what we found to be so instrumental in building this food safety culture.
Yeah, and I can't say enough about community because community really takes effort from citizens, members
Mm-hmm.
to have buy-in. They need to make a choice to be part of that community.
Right.
And so when we even think about that at an organization, or let's compare it to a community. The mayor isn't the one going, we need to drive this community program. The community is the one who collectively
Yeah.
is coming together and saying, this is what we're looking for in our community. How do we drive this together? And
Yeah.
like a mayor is there to help create resources, to get resources, to help clear barriers, to help get funding, whatever those things are. But they're not the ones who are holding the keys to say, this is what the community should be doing.
Right. Right.
They're there to help enable and support and drive and help from that aspect. And so
Mhm.
when we compare that to an organization, that's where my mind goes, well, when we look at it to work in that way,
Yeah.
because it would essentially, the way that we talk about food safety culture sometimes is the mayor needs to drive and put the initiative in place, when
Right.
really it's the community talking about what we need, what we want, what that looks like, and asking the mayor to support it, and asking
Right.
our top leaders to support that and be part of it with us and have the buy-in.
Right, exactly. I mean, you can even look at that from like a resources standpoint. I would say in industry, we put a lot of resources around executive coaching,
Hmm. Oh.
right? When in reality, when you look at a community, your resources need to be to the people that are driving the
Hmm.
behavior change, the culture change, the community, right? And the executors on the floor, on the ground, right? That's where the majority of your resources need to go. When in reality, in industry, you don't see a lot of resource support for those managers that are driving culture.
Yeah, and we need them to be ready to do that leading. We need them to be ready to transform from being an expert to that leader. And they have all the skills they need. They
Mhm.
just need to have someone help bring those out and give them the opportunity and the permission to use those.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
And it's
Yes.
not that, and executive coaching can be powerful because we've all seen, right? People get promoted, get promoted, get promoted, and they offer some really incredible skills, but they might not always be gifted in how to empower and engage teams
Hmm.
for them to source from within. And so I
Right.
think there definitely is a place for that, but there's also a really big place kind of in this space where we talk about making a difference for people readiness, for having people prepared to do those next steps and lead that.
Right, exactly. I mean, because just a little peek under the catalyst hood, we do executive coaching. And a lot of times we talk with those executives to say, how are your people ready,
Mhm.
getting ready to lead food safety culture? Are they ready for it? What are they missing? And a lot of those conversations, those open ended conversations, we get to, okay, my people do not have the right leadership skills to push this forward,
Mhm.
right? And then
Yeah.
of course, even to think about our boot camp is focused on getting leaders those skills.
Yeah, and kind of laying that groundwork. I like to refer to it as like the GMPs.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
We can't build a HACCP plan, we can't make, SPC charts, we can't do all this fun stuff until we have these basic GMPs in place. The
Yeah.
same thing is true to be a technical leader. For us to be ready to really be able to influence, to be able to lead, to inspire, there are some things that we need to have those foundational pieces on.
Right.
And once again, those aren't analyzing data, and those aren't knowing how to do risk assessments to the next level. These are the things that are related to how we support our team, how we structure our teams, how we are interacting with our teams around us and our support circle, because once again, food safety culture all comes back to people. And
Yes.
so how do we help put that focus really on being being people centric?
Right. Yeah. And I always bring up how we have examples of this through people culture, which, it makes sense in our mind, right? With people culture, but we
Mhm.
also see it with safety culture. A lot of work that has happened over the years in industries that really focus on safety, they have realized it's about human behaviors. It's
Mhm.
about people. And if you want your organization to be safe, right, which is the technical piece of it, then you have to focus on how people are behaving at your sites. And then
Mhm.
not even just that, right? Like some people are like, well, I know this is the safest thing to do, but I'm still going to jump off this ledge, right? I'm still going to climb this tree, even though it's probably not the safest thing to do.
Yeah.
How do you influence people to not do that, right? To not take those type of risks? And if you look at safety culture, just looking at safety culture in the United States and how that has transformed over the decades, there's something around focusing on people that cause safety culture to get better over time.
Mhm.
We can do the same in food safety, where we really focus on putting our resources around people, coaching them um, to create or really think about how their behaviors are influencing food safety and how to get those leadership skills. We would then start to see movement on the food safety side.
Yeah. And as you talk about even safety and how that moves forward, all of that was part about creating new conversations.
Mhm.
And so I think it's, how do we help people be curious about what works well to
Mhm.
help them be ready? Because there are quizzes, there's training, there are other aspects that you can, different avenues that you can explore. There's coaching.
Mhm.
Um, and understanding which ones are the ones that relate to you and help you move forward, but also which ones also then help you have and create those new conversations.
Yeah.
And so you'll hear us say it a million times. That's why we are such big advocates of actual true go to that, ICF definition of coaching, because really tapping into individuals' resourcefulness to help
Yeah.
drive things forward the way that they want and explore and be curious. That's very different than training.
Right. Yeah.
And I just that's so powerful. And if it's something that if you're not as familiar with, reach out to us, because of course I can talk about it all day. But it's all about how do we get people ready so that they can be carry forward with people-centric food safety culture.
Right. Yeah. And we really do feel like that coaching is the missing key, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Of course we do. We're biased.
of course we do. Of course we feel like that's the missing key.
Mhm.
But when you look at what you've been trying to do, right? I mean, just think about if you've been in the industry for 5 years, you know that there's the same message that goes out. We review the same KPIs. We talk about, well, how much product has been on hold, how much product have we had to destroy, how many recalls do we have, what recalls are happening out in the industry, what's our micro count, like we've had these conversations over and over and over, and we train over and over and over, right?
Mhm.
Like every year we do our allergen control program. We talk about environmental, we talk about the supply chain and maintaining the cold chain. We talk about all these technical things all the time. We're constantly training, we're
Mhm.
constantly showing examples of what's happening in the industry and data, right? The piece that's missing is that we don't continuously coach on those things throughout the year. We don't
Mhm.
continuously coach and empower people to ask different questions, to behave differently in the environment that they're in, to connect with people outside of giving a training or showing them information of what's happening in the industry or where we are on KPIs.
Mhm.
We're missing that human aspect of it. I used to do it's funny, like of course we had mandatory trainings, right? And everyone's coming to this training, they know we're going to talk about environmental, we're going to talk about HACCP, we're going to talk about their HACCP checks. And what I would always do is save some time at the end to just have a conversation with people.
Mm.
And I start out the training, I'm like, guys, we have to go through this training, it's required, but have some time at the end to talk about what barriers are you seeing around it? How can I make this check easier for you? Um, what do you miss around it? We had pretty strict corrective action if you missed a check or if you did the check incorrectly or anything like that. So it literally affected their jobs, right?
Mhm.
So having that conversation around like, what's missing? How can I help you? What's new on the floor that I may not be aware of? Having that human centric focus during that training and then even afterwards
Mhm.
where you have conversations, I always make a note. I need to go and I need to ask someone on all three shifts about this comment that someone said. Hey,
Mhm.
someone brought this up. Like, do you agree? Do you disagree? Have you seen it? That's the human centric part. That's the coaching piece that we're missing. I know I kind of like But
Well, no, because that's another level depending on, I think, where you are on the journey, right?
right,
Because even when it comes to training, it's typically, even though we'll say, well, we have it open for questions, let's all be real. A lot of times it's essentially one-way communication.
right, right,
And so, how do we even take that to be two-way communication to say,
mhm,
hey, what works well about this? Like,
right, yeah,
what doesn't work so well? Or what do you see is happening different on the floor than what we just talked about now?
hmm,
There are ways just to shift, once again, shift that conversation to have a new, to make it new, to
right,
engage
yeah,
people differently. And that's also linking back to letting people know, like, our culture shifting as well. Like, we want
yeah.
to engage you. We invite you to be part of this in a new way.
Right, exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. And we're not saying that you don't need that training. Please do your training.
For
Please do
sure.
your trainings. Please do your
Mhm.
required trainings and any training that you need to
Mhm.
put out there to your staff because
Mhm.
there's a place for it, right? There's a place
It's
for your KPIs. We even help our clients develop their KPIs and talk about their KPIs
Mhm.
and think through that process, right? Um, 100% that's needed.
Mhm.
You also need to think about how do you put this human aspect to it and get down to the core of how your people how are your people implementing this training that you're doing, how are they
Yeah.
thinking about each of the pieces, right? What's actually preventing them from hitting their KPIs?
Mhm.
Having that conversation and really understanding, and really that's soft skills, right? That's those leadership skills that we've been talking about in order to extract that information from people.
And I think about it where some all of these pieces, whether it's KPIs and data and training and coaching, they all have a part.
Yes.
And the part is navigating or understanding where they fit and how each of them play into helping prepare your team to be ready to go to the next place and to be supporting them to reach the goals and to reduce risk and to drive food safety culture.
Yeah.
But when I think about kind of what where people fit into this in my head, and this might not be the greatest analogy, but I think of this, like, think of a vehicle, a car. This a beautiful car where you look at it and you're like, dang, nice car, like shiny, nice tire, all that good stuff, right? And no engine.
Mm,
Like, to me, that's kind of where we've gotten so data and science, and that's all good, but we need to get the engine going. And
right.
the
Yeah.
engine is the people. So we need
Right.
to make sure, like, it's not just pretty from the outside. Like, we need to have that heart of, like, the car and the heart of people in food safety culture. And so that's really,
Mm,
what today was, right, all about. Like, how do we
yeah.
make it more human centric? How do we make sure we're bringing people in and having the conversation so that it's all not just show, it
Right.
really is what's under the hood.
Right. Exactly. So if
Mhm,
you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, how do I become more human centric? What are some things that I should be doing? Yes, we're doing the training. Yes, we have KPIs. We might need to develop them a little bit more or
mhm,
develop better training, but we have that. We know what direction. How do I add that human centric piece to it? Right? You know, a lot of things that we said is ask those open ended questions
mhm,
around, how do people join in on the conversation?
mhm,
What solutions do they need? What barriers are out there? Start with those open ended questions to your key stakeholders. And we're not just talking people on the floor, we're talking about even people a level above you or two levels above you.
mhm,
Um, Having those open ended questions on, we've been doing some things. How does that land on you? Or when I say this, what does that mean to you?
mhm.
Having those conversations is a great place to start.
And it doesn't mean, like, shift everything you do.
Right. Yes.
What if you take 15 minutes this week and have a different conversation with someone?
Mhm.
What if for your upcoming HACCP team meeting, you think of a new question that's open ended to really have your team pause for a moment and go, huh, how do we want to do that?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So it's these little moments that you can do right now. They don't cost anything. they're not too big of a drain on resources, that you can start even putting your toes in the water.
Right, exactly. A meeting that you show up to and you're given a food safety update and they're like, "Hey, come and talk about this." How do you ask those open-ended questions? How do you ask questions differently
Mhm.
there?
Mhm.
Where you are having them think a little bit more about food safety and again integrating food safety into the way that they already get work done.
Yeah, and sometimes it's even, you can layer from there because sometimes when we're in meetings in a group, not everybody is as open to sharing their ideas right away.
Hmm.
What if everybody writes it down on a post-it note and then you can collect them?
Yeah,
What if it's you send it out ahead of time so people can think about it?
yeah.
There's these little things that you can do to once again invite people to have a different conversation.
Right, exactly, exactly. And then I do want to mention, I mentioned this a couple of times as we're talking, is
Mhm.
that we focus on building these soft skills as a part of our technical leader path.
Mhm.
Depending on where you are in your growth process, right? We have a few different things going on around technical leader, but our biggest one that's happening right now and that's open is our technical leader boot camp.
Mhm.
And what we really focus on here is building those leadership skills, right? Like, how do you have those conversations with people? How do you get yourself ready in order to lead?
Mhm.
So looking at those pieces and really helping you develop those leadership skills so that you can become a stronger strategic leader in your organization. That's exactly what we do in Technical Leader Bootcamp. So
Yep.
I do want to plug that we have our cohort opening up in September.
Yeah.
So it starts September 15th.
Mhm.
And you can sign up now for it. It's a 14-week program, and this is what we do. This is what we coach to and get you ready. And I mean, the outcome is just amazing.
Yeah, it will change your perspective. It will let you move into conversations that you didn't even know you could have or
Mm,
that you wanted to have.
yeah,
It also provides those GMPs once again of leadership. But it's not the 4 hour I go to my HR course and, or I take a LinkedIn course on, how to influence people. Like we
right,
actually like the sweet spots and the things that we do, right, are part of like the community that we build because we're having real conversations about what's happening really for you right now and where you're going.
right.
And so that support you won't find that anywhere else.
Yeah. And it's based in being a technical expert.
Hmm.
I think that's why we say like it's so important that you understand how to be this technical expert so that you can be a technical leader.
Hmm.
Because a piece of that is that you do have to know what you're talking about, right? Like
Hmm.
you can't lead a food safety culture if you don't know food safety.
Hmm.
And so you need those things, and those are things that Jill and myself we understand because we've been there, right? Like we worked through this and we've helped cultures push forward. um, so it's all based in that technical knowledge around food safety. And even if you're listening and you're like, man, I'm in R&D or I'm in packaging, we also have people in those areas go through our technical leader because again it's based in those technical aspects of food and beverage. And
Hmm.
it's important for you to have that foundation so that you can grow it.
Absolutely. And if you have questions, hello at foodsafetycatalyst.com. We are happy to set up some time with you or just answer questions. But
Yeah,
check it out on our website. I think you're going to like it
I think so
and you're going to want
too.
to be part of it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So
All
thank
right.
you for joining us today. Like we love having these conversations, particularly around just human behavior and how people are really this key to food safety culture because
Mhm.
the more people that are thinking about this, the more food safety culture is going to strengthen, right? And that's ultimately what we need. We need for food companies, food and beverage companies to be making safe food. And we need to decrease the amount of recalls we're seeing. We need to make sure that our technical experts are stepping into these leadership roles to help
Mhm.
organizations move there. We need to not be burnt out and
Yeah.
overwhelmed and
Yep.
tired right?
We
Um,
need to take care of our technical team
yes,
members.
absolutely. Like, so we're super passionate about it, as you guys already know,
Mhm.
and we love hearing your perspective and your comments. So we
Yes.
definitely appreciate you listening and putting in your comments. If you're watching on replay, please do not hesitate to put in your comments and
Yep.
your perspective and what you've seen, right? Because we value that.
Yes. And next week, we're going to continue talking about food safety assurance and how do we move to that next step and what does it look like? Our guest is Larry Keener. And if you haven't had the opportunity to hear from Larry, you won't want to miss this.
Absolutely. We're excited about having Larry on Real Talk next week.
Very much. So we look forward to seeing you back here next week, same time, same place. Thank you so much for spending an hour of your day with us. We appreciate having you with us.
We do. Have a great day.